Hello and welcome. Today is April 10th. It's Good Friday, and we are going to have a quick conversation around Google Forms and creating Google Forms specifically for the purpose of student or parent surveys to get some feedback on how things are doing throughout our closure. And the second half an hour, we'll move on to Class Kick, which is a really cool interactive assignment tool. So wonderful. Let's look at an example. Joni Rungi at ESU5 put together this example of remote learning feedback form. We can do a lot of different things with Google Forms. I want to show you that in just a little bit, but here are some of the questions she was suggesting, we are suggesting at ESU5 that you might consider when creating a form, something similar to this. So wonderful. Number one is that you can easily locate those assignments. I think that's really important to get some feedback on. How easy is it for those parents, for those students to find your assignments each week? This is called a drop-down question, and we're giving people the option for strongly agree, agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. There's a few different ways we can do that in terms of the question type, and we'll play with those in just a little bit. Next up, so not only can I find them, but also that the directions are clear. Similar drop-down question. Then this is a perceptual question, right? How the time I'm asked to spend on work is appropriate. And you might write this from the parent perspective, the time my student is asked to spend on schoolwork is appropriate. Similar drop-down question. I really like, though, the idea that we would ask a perception question, how appropriate is the time, and also ask for that hard feedback of how much time do your students spend on schoolwork. And you can break that into whatever time frames you want, but the point is, I think every one of our school districts have a target number of time, a target time for how long we want folks to be working inside of whatever the content might be. Welcome, Joyce. So we're looking at Google Forms here. So we're thinking about what kinds of questions you might want to ask on a form to get some feedback from your students or from your parents. One question might be that you can easily locate. Another might be that the directions are clear. Maybe that the time is appropriate. But then we were just talking about it's a great idea to have both, so a combination of both that perception of this is appropriate from the parent or maybe student perspective, and I like having them actually report about, on average, how much time are kids spending on that schoolwork every day. So each one of our districts has a goal or a target number for minutes or hours a day of schoolwork. I think it would be important to not only know the parent or student's perception of how appropriate it is, but also have a hard number for how much time kids are actually spending. I think it's a great idea to give people, so I'll back up just a second. This is a drop-down question, and this is a multiple choice question. We'll dive deeper into what kinds of questions are available to us in just a little bit. So this is a short answer question, and it's asking you to just share. And so give us some feedback. If you disagreed or disagreed strongly with any of these things, please give us a little bit more feedback. Another good one, I know how to contact my teacher when I need help. That's good. And I can find ways to cope and remain healthy in my feelings and thoughts. This one was created with help from Jen McNally, our mental health director at ESU5. I think it's a great question. We're all working through these closure times, this self-quarantine experience. Our ESU5 colleagues have created some great parent and student-facing resources around mental health. And potentially, if I know that folks are disagreeing or disagreeing strongly here, then maybe that would be a resource I'd like to share out with my parents. You'll notice at the top, I'm going to go slow. Great. This is an anonymous survey. It's not collecting any, I'm not asking you to write what your name is. I'm not asking you to give me your email address. It's just to get me some good anonymous feedback. So this is an example of what a survey might look like. I'm going to copy that and stop my share, open the chat, and pop that into the chat box there so that you have access to it. However, a difficulty with Google Forms is that it's not like Google Docs where I can easily make a copy of this and send it to you. Yeah, I think it's actually easier if you create your own. And so that's what we're going to dive into next. So I'd love a little bit of feedback from you. This one is using the poll feature inside of Zoom. So that poll is asking you, how confident are you can do this? So you can use Google Forms. How confident are you that you can use Google Forms? Go ahead and click one of those responses, and one more, go ahead. Great. So now I can end the poll and I can share the results with participants and your example students, right? So we're feeling somewhere in the middle, and so we can do this with some help, or maybe we need a lot of help, and this is the place to be if that's the case. So excellent. We're going to go to drive.google.com. So inside of my Google Drive is where I can go to New and then Google Forms. It's kind of hidden, but we go to, in our Drive, we go to New and then under More to Google Forms. I want to share, before I create a new one, I'd like to share another form that I created that walks us through what are the question types that we have available to us. So you notice this isn't a question, but you're able inside of your Google Forms to add different sections or titles to your form. This is a good way to break up your form. Maybe you have a form that is more about, so you're asking a couple different types of questions. So I could have a header then that adds a title to a section. And you can add a quick description there too. Next up, we have a short answer question. And so these don't allow for folks to add a whole lot of text. So I'm typing. I mean, you can see I can still type quite a bit inside of a short answer question. My recollection is that folks can type, I think it's 300 or 400 characters here. So it's a short answer question. A paragraph question would really allow folks to not only type a bunch, but also use that enter key to add even paragraphs to their response inside of Google Forms. So short answer, these are our two open-ended question types, our short answer and our paragraph questions. I don't know that I kind of like the paragraph because it doesn't make those responses smaller. What I mean by that, right? If I'm trying to type, so this is my response to your question, now I can't see what I've typed. You see what I'm saying? The short answer questions, when you're filling it out, and now it's kind of hard if I'm typing longer than I don't know, 10 words, it's a bit hard to see what I've written and then edit my response. I have to scroll over and now I can see just a little bit. So great, I'm gonna scroll down a bit. This is a multiple choice question. So you're only able to select one response in a multiple choice question. You are able to allow folks to give an other response. Of course, when I create the quiz, then I'm the one who decides what is option 1, what is option 2 and 3, and so on. But then I'm able to give people the ability to give me their own option, option 34. This is a checkbox question, a little bit different from our multiple choice, where I can only select one with the multiple choice. The checkbox questions allow us to select more than one option. So if you're asking parents maybe what times work best for your student to connect with me on Zoom, then you might want them to only select one time. Maybe you want to give folks the option to pick more than one response, and so that would be a checkbox question. Next is a drop-down question, and here it's very similar to the multiple choice. You can only pick one, but with the drop-down, then it's not showing you all of the responses at the same time. I especially like this. So, for example, if you didn't want the form to be anonymous, maybe you would say select your student. And so instead of having a multiple choice question with 20 responses here, right, that's very long on that page, you can put that into a drop-down question, have folks click on it, and then they can choose their response. So it's very similar to the multiple choice, but it doesn't show you all of those options until you click on the drop-down arrow. A nice option, this was recently added in the last year or two to Google Forms, is this ability for folks to upload a file. On the back side, you can actually tell it that I want this only to be a Word file or a movie file or some type of file. You also then would say how much, what is the maximum number of file size that you want to allow. And I'll show you that in just a little bit when we're editing. But that's, I like this ability. Potentially, you're asking parents to take a picture of student work and turn it in with a Google form, maybe. I don't know. I've also used this with participants where I'm asking them to share a little bit about themselves and then share with me a file upload, a quick headshot of them. I did that for a project we're doing so that then I could create kind of a folder of who's participating. Great, that's a file upload question. Next up is a linear scale question, and you get to say what is on both sides. You can also tell it how many numbers you want in between. I like the linear scale questions. When we come back over to our example here of what this might look like, initially we had this as a linear scale question. My concern, though, with a linear scale question is that people don't always pay attention to what it says on both sides. They just click a number. And so I kind of like forcing them to actually pick agree or disagree. If we're thinking about those kind of like, do you agree or disagree? To what degree do you agree or disagree? But at any rate, those are the linear scale questions. Next up it's a grid question. There are two different types of grid questions, our checkbox and our multiple choice. So this allows me to kind of ask 3 questions in one. So similar over here where I might ask that agree or disagree, I could put these things that what I'm asking you to agree or disagree to inside of the different topics in the different rows. So for example, I could say here, I know how to contact my teacher. And option 1 might be, yes, I agree strongly, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. A similar idea, though, to that scale question, I sometimes shy away from this in surveys because I want to make sure that folks are picking the option that they want instead of just clicking around. But you'll notice here again, this is that multiple choice where I can only select one response per row. Now that's different with the checkbox questions, where I can then pick as many of those options as I want for each one of those rows. Great. We're almost done, and I don't want to overwhelm us, but I do want to give you an idea of what we can do with a Google form. This is a date question. You can have it be just a date, or you can also have it be a time. So for example, I might ask parents, what date do you want to have a, I don't know, happy hour on Zoom for the kids, right? No alcohol involved, of course. And so I'm asking them to maybe suggest a date. So they can click on that down arrow and then they can pick a date. I can include the time, or I don't have to include the time. I can include the date, or I don't have to include the date. So the time question here, I can say AM or PM, so 4 o'clock PM. Great, that's a date question. So it can be either the date or the time. There are also, though, time questions that can look very similar to this. What time do you want to do something? But another feature with the time question is that I can set it up to say what duration. So for example, that question where I'm asking folks how much time per day are people working on schoolwork, potentially I could have that be a time question, and now they can say 3 hours, hopefully not 3 hours, right? And 30 minutes of time in elementary. I'm going to press this next button to illustrate. Oops, it looks like we got to have a number in there. We'll put a number. Great. Scroll down and say next. So with the next, inside of a Google form, you can have multiple pages. In the example form here, we don't have multiple pages. It's just one page. And when I'm done at the bottom, I can then press submit and be done. When I come over here though, sometimes if you have a longer survey that you want to ask parents, it can be a little bit overwhelming to open the survey and see it just go on forever. So breaking it up into different sections is what this is called, different sections. It might be a good way to make it feel a little bit more manageable. And here I wanted to illustrate a couple more ideas things we can do with forms. You can add images if you want to add images. You're also able to add videos. And actually this might be a good example where if I'm sharing an instructional video, for example, maybe I want to put the video into a Google form and then ask some multiple choice process questions and get some student feedback on those process questions. So great. That is the broad overview of everything that our Google Forms can do. I also, though, want to look at some of the settings. And this is really important, so glance with me here. When I'm editing a form, so we're going to come back to my Google Drive, and we went to New, and we said More, and then we said Google Form. And when we do that, inside of your settings, the first thing I'd recommend that you do is make sure that you're not collecting responses. I think the default in a lot of our schools is that it's requiring people to log in to your school's Google domain. And our parents don't have a Google account from our school. So it's really important when you create a new Google form that we do click on those settings and we make sure that this button is not clicked. Next up, you can ask them to collect email addresses, but here once more, that requires that the parent is logged into a Google account. And some of our parents don't have Google Mail accounts. So therefore, I would recommend we don't use this button. If you want to collect the parents' email addresses, then we can do that inside of a form. I can say, enter your email address. And when you create a question, it's actually interesting. You just saw it change from a multiple choice question to a short answer question. It tries to predict what kind of question do you want. Kind of cool. If you want to ask folks to share their email address, I can click on these three dots over here, and it says response validation in this bottom right. And now I can say, I want this to be a text, and I need it to contain an email address. And here's where also I can make the question required. I don't want to tell you to make all of those questions required, but let's look back at the example that we have from Joni. And so that little asterisk right there is communicating that that's a required question. This one is not required. When I scroll up here, this is not required. So I would actually recommend, if you're sending a survey home, that you do make every one of those questions required, unless we're talking about something like, if I scroll down here, this open-ended where it's if you said no or disagree, then share why. This one doesn't have to be required, of course, right? Because maybe I didn't disagree or strongly disagree. So the risk, though, if we don't make questions required that we do want to know about, is that people won't, they just won't answer them. So that's a risk. So great. Of course, when we create the form, we would want to create a wonderful title. And then when I click up here in the title or the name of the file, the name of the form, it automatically changed to the title that I had put on there. Great. So this is the editing side of your Google form. I'm going to add a new question. So I'll click down here. So we have our enter our email address. I'll click a new question. And so this is a new question. And of course, we have option 1, we probably have option 2, and the like. Here is where, if you want to add that other, you can add the other. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it's nice to allow folks to add their own response. And of course, here's where I can require it or not require it. Another hidden feature here is that I can see the title. I can also add a description. So if I click in that bottom there, I can say add a description, and here's the description. So to maybe provide a little bit more context around that question. Wonderful. So I can continue to add questions, however many questions you desire to have. I'm going to come back over here. Maybe I do like this question. So you have access to this example. It'd be fairly quick to highlight the questions that you like, come back to your Google form and Control C to copy, right? And Control V to paste. And Joni very much, and that's why we created that form. That's why she created that form, was so we could share it with you, and then you can copy the questions and add them into your own forms. So great. This is how I would add a title, these TT, the title and the description. Wonderful. If you wanted to do that, if you wanted to add an image, you can click on the image, you can search a Google image of a cat, because everybody loves 2 different eye colors on a kitty cat, right? I can pull from a YouTube video. So this is actually doing a YouTube search. So let's search for a cat. I bet we get silly cats, funniest cats. Great, and now that video's put in there. Once again, it'd be a slick way to share the instructional video and then add some comprehension questions if you wanted to do that. This is the button where I can add a new section like we saw. If you wanted to break your form into different pieces, like I can click here, and now I'm onto section 2. And I can continue adding questions. So after I'm done making my form as wonderful as I would like it to be, I always recommend previewing it. That's this button up here, that eyeball. And this is what our form looks like. We can see, remember that the asterisk means that this is a required question. And you'll remember we added that the response validation or the data validation here. So if I don't enter a valid email address, it tells me this must be a valid email address, and it won't let me submit it until I actually put it in as a valid email address. And so wonderful. This is the link that I would share with my parents. Let me say that again. You don't want to share the link to the edit. You want to share the link to the view form. So I can copy that and I can paste it in an email, or I can paste it into Seesaw, but this would be the link, the one that says view form. And then another tip that I always like to share, you're logged into your Google account and you're logged in to your school account. So of course you can see your form, but can your parents? To find out, in Google Chrome, when you click on these 3 dots here, you can open an incognito window, and that means now I'm not logged in. I'm not logged into any Google account, any account. This is it's incognito, right? They don't know, they aren't tracking who I am here. And so now I can paste that link in, and does it work? Yes, it does. I'm going to come back over here and go back into that edit, that setting. Remember, if I restrict people, and remember, this is the default for many of our schools, that it says restrict people from accessing it. Now, when I come over to our incognito window and press refresh, it's going to make me sign in. So this is a common mistake or a common error that educators make, is that they don't go to that setting and make sure that you're not requiring people to sign in to be able to access your Google form. I'm going to stop my screen share. We got through it all. We're right at the end, right at 1:29. I'm going to stop.